never ever publish them. Jackie had asked her children time and time again, and repeated her plea some years later to her daughter Caroline on her wedding day. Suddenly, turning serious, she told her, never ever publish them. What was it she wanted to keep secret? A series of conversations recorded shortly after the assassination of her husband in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. They are conversations about history and about her own personal history, including some very intimate secrets and controversial opinions. Since then, time has passed and life has carried on. Jackie pursued a brilliant career as an editor in New York until her death in May 1994. Until now, Caroline had kept the promise she made to her mother. But in 2011, a television network decided to make a fictional portrayal of the Kennedy saga. The series would reveal certain family secrets. In an attempt to stop the rumor mill and to avert controversy, Caroline decided to make public the 8 hours of interviews that the still distraught Jackie gave barely 4 months after her husband's death. The young widow was then 34, and she recounts the past like a novel about her dream life with her husband, John Kennedy. She cannot change the past, so she may as well rewrite it. Her confessions reveal the true personality of the former First Lady. Caroline was 7 years old when her father died. She remembers the weeks that followed the assassination in Dallas. Her distraught mother walled herself in silence. The insights she gave were interrupted by sighs. The words wouldn't come out.
1 minute, load!
Jackie talked of her solitude, providing small details of her existence. The end of a dream life. The American dream, which turned into a nightmare.
30 seconds!
She could still hear the incessant drumming from Jack's funeral. Jack. She always called him that in the interviews. Never John, not JFK, but Jack. That way their names are like twins. Jack and Jackie, united forever. The night of her funeral, her only thought was about knowing where she would sleep from then on. Even when everything else crumbles, life must go on. There has to be reference points, familiar places, security. Jackie left her home for the first time on December 3rd, 1963, 10 days after her husband's death. Clint Hill, her bodyguard, and the man who jumped onto the hood of the president's vehicle when the first shot rang out, was being decorated with the Medal of Honor. Hill had spent 3 years at her side, protecting and advising her. The only day he failed in his duty was in Dallas. The two of them felt adrift. She had lost her husband. Hill had not managed to keep him alive. Jackie said that Hill would have given his life for us. Three days later, on Friday, December 6th, Jackie left the White House and moved a few blocks away to Georgetown. Sometime before, she had invited the journalist Theodore White to the family estate at Hyannisport. She had chosen him as confidant to deliver her testimony of the assassination. She trusted him, so she chose him to deliver her testimony of the assassination. The journalist had always been sympathetic to the president. She didn't want anyone else to tell her story. She had an immense need to speak. She talked for 4 hours. Jackie relived the presidential trip to Dallas. She talked about her pink suit, a color she loved. Jack had asked her to wear it that day. She wore it all day, despite the bloodstains that soiled it, to show the world what the killing of the president had done to her. Just after the fatal shots, she climbed onto the hood of the car. It was neither an act of desertion nor dishonor, but a bid for life. There was nothing more she could do for Jack. With Theodore White, she talked about the assassination in a rather delirious manner. She talked about the beauty of the inside of Jack's skull, which she held in her hands, the concentric circles of its matter, with an iridescent layer of red.
Robert Kennedy. They are helping her.
One imagines this would be her leitmotif, a beautiful and perfectly formed head that did not deserve this fate. She also talked about the death of their son, Patrick, who died at birth that very summer, an event that brought them closer together. That day, she took the weeping Jack in her arms and told him, "The only thing I couldn't bear would be losing you." Theodore White's article, carefully edited by Jackie, appeared in Life magazine on December 6, 1963. It was here that she laid the foundations of the Kennedy myth, starting to build the legend of JFK, a man who died a hero, like King Arthur on the battlefield, sword in hand. The lady in pink was continually driven by a dual purpose, that of molding her own image while managing that of the president. But lost, crushed, the lady in pink was no more. In her place, a young woman in black was emerging, wondering what her future would hold. Bobby assumed Jack's place alongside her, and it was from his offices in the Department of Justice that Jackie thanked the American people for their help and support. She was enveloped, almost kept under surveillance, by her brothers-in-law, Bobby and Ted.
I want to take this opportunity to express my appreciation for the hundreds of thousands of messages which my children and I have received over the past few weeks. The knowledge of the affection in which my husband was held by all of you has sustained me, and the warmth of these tributes is something I shall never
Because the Kennedys had embarked on constructing a myth, a shrine to the glory of the assassinated hero. This began with the building of a large library in Boston, as well as a project collecting memories, stories, and accounts, including Jackie's own account, which, at her request, was not to be divulged until 50 years after her death. Her desire to confide in someone was endless, but not reckless. She and Bobby preferred to manage the Kennedy legend themselves. They wanted to move on once and for all. She spoke to forget. The renowned historian and advisor to JFK, Arthur Schlesinger, took over responsibility for these conversations with Jackie. 7 times she invited him into the new home she had made in an upscale neighborhood of Washington. But the curious still flocked to her door. She felt constantly observed and under scrutiny. The recordings began on Monday, March 2nd, 1964. Jackie, while remaining discreet and timid, didn't hold back. Telling her own story was her route to freedom, a way of evacuating her tensions, expressing her passions, and of laying the foundations of the JFK myth.
I would like to say a few words dead, but John Fitzgerald can look forward to retiring leave so strongly that one's aim should not just be his last visit. John, who was so intensely involved in life. He believed that one man can't do that. That is why I know that the library will be the best.
She returned to the very beginning. Right away, she contradicted the Kennedy clan's version of the legend that it was Joe, the eldest brother, who had been designated by their father to one day become President of the United States. This brother fell as a war hero, but he possessed neither Jack's stature, nor his talent, or his intelligence. No, her husband did not become president by default. She was a young, fashionable photo reporter in Washington. She sacrificed her ambition by making the choice to become the perfect wife of the young senator from Massachusetts. For the 2 years and 9 months of JFK's presidency, she kept her mouth shut, limiting herself to smiling. Now, she wanted to underline her role in Jack's nascent career. She told how she translated books from the French for him about the century's greatest men, and how she had organized dinners and receptions. She was no trophy wife and didn't like that expression. And he was no narcissistic playboy, although other men were jealous of his youth and good looks. She claimed for herself the role of confidant and assistant to the future president, but she certainly was neither his muse nor his inspiration. Between us, we talked politics the whole time. Jack's ambitions crumbled in 1956 after his failed candidacy as Vice President of the United States. A candidacy that Joe, his father, thought a waste of time, since it was lost from the start. Jack had thrown himself into it like a rabid dog. Jackie stood by his side. John would sleep in his hotel room alone, but she stressed that not a day went by when they didn't see each other. JFK's victory in the 1960 presidential election owed a lot to Jackie. Always at her husband's side, she shook thousands of hands, keeping a calm composure, an eternal smile on her face. She became a true campaign professional. Kennedy only just won the election against Nixon, his disgraceful and sick opponent, whose wife was too submissive in Jackie's eyes. His first interview session was rambling, a sort of test run. Jackie and Arthur Schlesinger arranged to meet the following day. Jackie recounted her everyday life in the wake of Jack's death. Furnishing her new home, the bills to pay, Caroline's schooling, and so on. Alone at night, she would smoke and drink, and no longer answered the phone. Caroline told her schoolteacher about the sadness that reigned in the household. The previous night, John had torn a page out of the newspaper showing a picture of his father's assassination in order not to hurt Mommy. During the second interview, Arthur Schlesinger questioned Jackie about the days that followed Jack's victory in the presidential election. The date was November 1960. It was the high point of their lives. Their son John was born shortly after the election, and it was an immense source joy. Jack came to see Jackie at the maternity ward 3 times a day. This almost made her forget the summer of 1956 when, 4 years earlier, she lost her daughter, Arabella, due to a premature birth. Upon hearing the news, Jack, who had been on vacation in the Mediterranean, reportedly told his brother, "The kid's dead. What do you want me to do?" Bobby had to convince him to get on the plane. She recalled the weeks preceding his inauguration as the new president, by far the dearest of the entire presidential episode. First off, their vacation in Florida, then the preparations for the festivities. The inauguration ceremony was held on January 20th, 1961. Both of them felt like children on Christmas Eve.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Jack wrote his own memorable speech. She knew this, she said, because he had recited excerpts to her in Florida. And yet, it was common knowledge that a loyal collaborator wrote Kennedy's speeches. Jackie was sorry she wasn't able to kiss her husband at the inauguration. She left in the middle of the party. The president's loyal friends were all present: Frank Sinatra, Peter Lawford. And she knew that neither of them was a model of good behavior. The party promised to be a wild affair. Jack came to see her in the middle of the night. She was still awake, overwhelmed with joy. They slept in the same bed. The years of the presidency made up her best memories. Jackie accorded herself much importance, a major historical role that she probably never had. She talked of world events as if she had been there, implicated, consulted, and involved in strategic decisions. In reality, the president was alone, poorly advised, served by a bad cabinet, and envied by foreign leaders. She even recounted that Jack would have her read diplomatic telegrams. Jackie wasn't just a witness or accomplice to his power, but a genuine collaborator of the president. Cuba, Kennedy's nightmare moment. In April 1961, an attempted landing in the Bay of Pigs, led by anti-Castro troops equipped by the CIA, failed miserably. The humiliating episode proved critical for the president. The lady in pink commented, "Jack, under immense pressure, found it impossible to keep his calm. Castro's presence in Cuba terrified him. The event shook them. The newly elected president's credibility had nearly been ruined in the eyes of the world. She blamed the FBI and the CIA. Jack had been given no choice. She condemned Nixon and Eisenhower as responsible for allowing Castro to come to power in Cuba. Cuba was an open wound. After the Bay of Pigs, she saw Jack cry. A year later, the president negotiated the release of the rebels with Cuba's leader, Maximo, bringing an end to the episode. He then put Brother Bobby in charge of special operations from that point on. Although John was tough and generally slept well, his one moment of weakness and borderline depression was triggered by Khrushchev. Nikita Khrushchev was the leader of the Soviet Union. The pair met in June 1961 in Vienna, Austria. Kennedy and Khrushchev talked of the Tsars, of Tolstoy, of Laika, the dog that had just conquered space. Some weeks later, a present from Russia arrived for Jackie at the White House, one of Laika's puppies. In Vienna, she spent her time with Mrs. Khrushchev, of whom she painted a cruel portrait. Whenever Jackie took out a cigarette, the matronly woman warned, "Do not smoke so much. Russian women do not smoke." She also made it clear she thought Russian women were far superior to their American counterparts, which Jackie took as a slap in the face. She nonetheless recalled that Mrs. Khrushchev had a delightful face. De Gaulle had warned her, "Be on your guard. She's the most crafty woman." In Vienna, Jack found himself confronted with a cynical, warlike Khrushchev with a gloomy sense of humor. Khrushchev deemed Kennedy intelligent, but weak. Jack, on the other hand, saw Khrushchev as a gangster through and through. Jackie described a terrified Kennedy who confided something of the sort, "There will perhaps be a war with the USSR." Indeed, the Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962 came a hair's breadth away from triggering a third global conflict. For 10 days and nights, the president worked in an apocalyptic atmosphere, and she remained at his side, loyal as ever. Jackie cast herself as witness of these monumental events taking place on the international political stage.
Today been informed by Chairman Khrushchev that all of the IL-28 bombers now in Cuba.
The Cuban Missile Crisis ended with indisputable victory for Kennedy. Jack, enjoying his glory, told her, "If anyone has ever wanted to shoot me, today would be the perfect moment." Jackie also appeared to bask in the reflected Kennedy glory. "I was the best. Jack was proud of me." Still, the presidency was wearisome. On weekends, the presidential couple would often leave for their residence in Glenora, Virginia, where they planned to live. Jackie would ride horseback while he slept, each in their own solitude. She described how he would devour history books. He would read in the car, at the table, even while walking. A fortnight later, she would recognize extracts from the books in his own speeches. It was on board boats that Jack was at his most relaxed. He loved the water, the sun, and the absence of telephones. That was true happiness. He regretted not having known more happy moments in his lifetime. For behind his permanently tanned face, Kennedy was sick and had been for a long time. Addison's disease gnawed at his bones, his spine slowly crumbling. The pain was crippling. His atrophied muscles even prevented him from putting on his shoes. He slept on a horsehair mattress placed on planks. Jack suffered greatly from his back. He was always suffering, all his life. Jackie spoke of Jack's courage, of Jack the martyr, of that wounded body, of crutches after surgery in 1955. That was when he discovered Novocaine, and it was as if he was born again. But what she could not speak about was his addiction to the drugs supplied by the scandalous Dr. Jacobson. From the early days of his presidency, Jacobson prescribed him shots that made the president euphoric. Bobby had the FBI analyze these drugs: Demerol, cocaine, painkillers. JFK was an addict. That was why, after the assassination in Dallas, Bobby accepted a botched autopsy to prevent anyone from discovering his brother's drug problem.
It will never be a dead.
The third interview with Arthur Schlesinger took place the next day.
The end of his time.
Jackie, by turns, revealed herself, hid, and revisited her life. Everything was so tangled. That night, she'd been thinking about Lyndon B. Johnson, her husband's successor. After his brother's death, Bobby Kennedy remained the Attorney General. In his eyes, Johnson had no mandate. He was an usurper. Jackie herself couldn't forgive the new president for having pounced at the presidency, being sworn in Dallas barely 1 hour after Jack's death. And yet, those are the rules.
I will do my best. That is all I can do.
Johnson? He amused Jack, she said. But he was incompetent, crude, and lazy. The kind of man who couldn't make a decision, who yielded to everyone's opinions. Envious, greedy, only interested in the superficial symbols of power: planes, protocol, the fame. Jack would say, "Do you realize what would happen to this country if he became president?" Jackie said she was thrown out of the White House, but she was lying. It was she who wanted to leave. Shortly after, Johnson offered her the post of ambassador in Paris. And anyway, she didn't want to go back there. Whenever she went anywhere in Washington, Jackie would go out of her way to avoid the place where she spent the best years of her life. She kept everything from those years, like so many trophies: the diaries, the menus, the memos. She used to love taking care of the plants there and setting the table for official dinners. Beauty, elegance, distinction. It had been her house. With the president's blessing, Jackie hired a French interior decorator. Despite the misgivings of American public opinion, afraid she was too much of a Francophile. Under the Kennedys' rule, the White House was transformed into the court of the Sun King, a setting worthy of Versailles. She had feared that her marriage might run aground during the presidency, but they had never been so close, a united family, an inseparable couple. She had an office in the White House and saw Jack every day at any moment. She continued to paint a glowing and tender portrait of him, always attentive, always warm, always kindly, and she the model wife. He loved putting the kids on his lap, she recalled, but he couldn't carry them in his arms or lift them into the air because of his back. He would tell them a lot of stories, the one about the white shark and the black shark, or the one about Bobo the Lobo. The perfect husband and an ideal father. Who could believe her? She wasn't talking to her interviewer. She was talking to posterity. The legend must live on. Jack was her God. God bless America. In God we trust. American presidents have always proclaimed their faith. Jack had decided to believe out of superstition, she said, but added, I think that God is unjust. Because God didn't believe in John Kennedy. She paused, overwhelmed with emotion. She took a drink, hesitated. He had the most incredible aura. Jack was a living myth, the idol of youth, the world over. Knowing that he was loved made Jack feel great. And it was exactly that which distinguished him from the old dinosaurs in the Senate. A fortnight went by between the third interview and the next. Jackie traveled to New York and went out with Bobby. She spent a lot of time with him. Was their relationship platonic or romantic? Today, some tend to believe he was a source of comfort that went beyond the merely spiritual. Bobby was more than just her brother-in-law. He was the brother she'd never had, her friend. Bobby and Jackie were soulmates.
I would like to say a few words about the John Fitzgerald and look forward to retiring.
After Bobby's death 4 years later, she wept,
Be a dead
I hate America.
John
It's
Kennedy,
killing the
who was
Kennedys.
So intensely involved in life.
One weekend in September 1963, 2 months before Dallas, they were in Newport. Jackie was recovering from the death of Patrick, her third child. In pictures from that trip, we can see Ben Bradley, a friend from the Washington Post, accompanied by his wife Toni, the blonde woman. According to Toni, JFK attempted on several occasions to seduce her. If it could be called seduction, so aggressive was his technique. The other woman is Toni's sister, Mary Pinchot Meyer, the president's most loyal mistress. Jackie can't not know. Especially when she learned that he had spent the night with Mary Meyer, not to mention the succession of women in her husband's bed, from bathing session to siesta, friends of the family, society women, models, actresses, secretaries, and prostitutes. Jack compartmentalized his life, his family, his work, his friends, and the part he never revealed, an unbridled sex life. In Puritan America, it was perhaps his dark side. There were so many women in Jack's life, but Jackie didn't say anything about any of these affairs. In one moment of defiance, though, she threw down this challenge. She'd better be wonderful, that mistress of yours, to justify cheating on a woman like me. Instead, Jackie emphasized how discreet her husband was. He'd send her abroad as much as possible so that she could have fun. Go to Italy with your sister, go to New York or Greece.
Cerco nel mio cuore se non c'è un altro ritornello. Piango ogni giorno che Dio fa e non ti posso dire.
While she was vacationing on Capri in June of 1962, Mimi, an intern at the White House, became the president's mistress at the tender age of 19. Years later, Mimi recounted that Kennedy repeatedly offered her drugs. He would also offer her to his collaborators as a gift. Jackie said of Jack, he doesn't ever cheat in anything. Then she fell silent. She seemed lost in her memories. She took a deep breath, had a drink, and asked, "May I say that?" Arthur Schlesinger encouraged her. "You may say whatever you like, Jackie." But suddenly she reconsidered. "No, actually, it's not worth it." She never mentioned how jealous Jack was. It is said that Kennedy even demanded paternity tests for their two children, Caroline and John John. He was convinced that his wife behaved as immorally as he did. When she took a trip to Greece in 1963, he instructed Clint Hill, Jackie's bodyguard, to make sure that Onassis didn't get too close. During her final remarks of this session, she talked of what she calls the poison of the presidency. We were completely cut off from the world in the White House, and were always the last to hear what everyone was saying about us. Around that time, Jackie had put the house in Glenora up for sale. They never got to live there after all. It was a home just for the two of them, for after the presidency. She couldn't bring herself to settle there without him. She wanted to move to New York, perhaps to follow Bobby, who had decided to run for senator. She wanted to distance her children from the Kennedy clan. The Warren Commission hearings to investigate the Kennedy assassination had started. The first to be interrogated was the other widow from Dallas, the wife of Oswald, the presumed assassin. Jackie would soon have her turn. During the fifth interview, Jacqueline Kennedy touched on a sensitive subject, France.
I would like to say a few. It will never be a dead John Fitzgerald Kennedy Library. My husband believed so strongly that when he ended, it should not just be the most comfortable life John.
Known for her love of the country, Jackie now, however, painted a harsh and cruel caricature of it during the interview. Throughout his trip to Paris on May 31st, 1961, Kennedy was presented as the guy accompanying Jacqueline Kennedy. the couple won over the French, who found Jackie brilliant and cultivated, and the jubilant crowd welcomed her like a legendary princess. France was the homeland of the Bouviers, Jackie's paternal side of the family. She felt at home there. She'd spent time in Paris during her youth. She adored French fashion designers, the city's architecture, and the great figures of French history, Napoleon, Saint-Simon, Lafayette, and Madame Récamier, as well as a certain Charles de Gaulle, France's liberator. Strangely, 3 years after this voyage, Jackie seemed to renounce this love. Kennedy's advisor had warned them, de Gaulle is a fascist, an arrogant colonialist, or at best, a Don Quixote who is full of himself. Hence, the meeting between the two leaders proved difficult, fraught with fundamental disagreements, although there was a certain reciprocal admiration. De Gaulle presented himself as Kennedy's friendly yet critical protector. Playing the polite yet curious guest, Kennedy questioned the old general. He pretended to accept his advice, assuring him of his admiration, even going so far as to cite the opening sentence of his memoirs of war, which he paraphrased as, "I've always had a certain idea of the United States." Overcome with sorrow, Jackie now admitted that her husband felt nothing but contempt for de Gaulle, and that she disliked the French just as much as him. He fueled his bitterness. This general was vindictive. His pride had compromised relations with the United States. He was disloyal. Nevertheless, de Gaulle had been an unconditional ally during the Cuban Missile Crisis. In an act of childish spitefulness, she even had all the Cézanne paintings taken down in her private quarters to remove any French presence in the White House. She didn't spare poor Madame de Gaulle either. She had seemed so weary. She seemed to have suffered so much. She sort of drifted about on her own, staring into space. Sitting next to her, Jack tried to talk about something other than embroidered tablecloths. Jackie still chuckled. Once again, it was all about the legend. De Gaulle was supposedly so infatuated with Jackie that he couldn't take his eyes off her throughout the entire stay. In Paris, Jackie showed her seductive side, later recalling without the slightest modesty, "I know that the general was interested in me." She did, however, acknowledge a certain gallantry and courtesy in the general's manners. But still, she named her poodle de Gaulle. Choked with sorrow, she closed the interview with this venomous portrait of the old general, who she saw as guilty of having outlived her husband, of still being alive while her husband wasn't. Today in Arlington, an eternal flame burns on the tomb of the assassinated president. Jackie wanted this flame to be just like the one burning at the Arc de Triomphe, and she got that idea from her trip to Paris. In Paris, she insisted on meeting with the very romantic French hero, the writer André Malraux, the de Gaulle's Minister of Culture. She overflowed with adulation. Meeting Malraux was like running an obstacle course in fog at 70 miles an hour. With him, your mind goes back and forth. He is the most fascinating man I've ever spoken with. She presented Kennedy as a worthy conversation partner for Malraux. He had an amazing exchange with my husband, she says. Usually parsimonious with her praise, this time she gave in, effusing. The brilliance of one was reflected in the brilliance of the other. She invited him to the United States on 2 occasions. Kennedy had asked his wife to serve as liaison between de Gaulle and America, so as not to lose the connection. André Malraux brought the Mona Lisa with him, which was exceptionally borrowed from the Louvre for an exhibition at the National Gallery in Washington. The exhibition had an enormous impact and, in Jackie's eyes, enhanced the splendor of the Kennedy presidency. But Jackie made another gaffe and tactlessly described him and his wife, Madeleine, as being like 2 sinister crows. Malraux's face was pale and bloated with tears, distorted by nervous tics. André Malraux had just lost his 2 sons in an accident. She was aware of this, but couldn't help herself. Malraux, she said, worshipped de Gaulle like a spaniel worships its master. De Gaulle would talk down to him, like to a servant, perhaps out of jealousy, because Malraux was too close to me, she added. Speaking slowly, in a rather childish voice, Jackie was cold-bloodedly candid. At the end of March 1964, Jackie was faring much better. She took her children to Aspen, taking some time to reflect on history and on her own story. Now she opened up a bit more, allowing the sad and frightened woman hidden under the arrogant lady in pink to emerge. When Jack was president, like a little girl, I thought I'd never be afraid again when falling asleep. She admitted that she dreaded the day when he would no longer be president. He would have become a writer, journalist, or speaker. She had dreamed that Kennedy would be named President of the United States for life. Only he, dazzling and intelligent, could prevent the country going off the rails. She was no doubt still convinced of this. On May 29, 1964, Jackie commemorated her husband's birthday.
I would like to say it will never be a dead John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Look forward to retiring to his belief so strongly.
Simply or simplistically, she concluded that not a single one of Jack's contemporaries could measure up to him. Churchill, Nehru, Adenauer, Martin Luther King. None was the equal to Jack.
Good evening, my fellow citizens. Peace and freedom.
The cause of freedom.
In a time of danger, in the world of communism, freedom, not coercion, is the wave of the future. And we hope around the world, free to choose their own future. All the way.
And we shall win.
November 1962.
My husband had looked forward to retiring. My husband believed so strongly in this that one's aim should not just be this last visit. John, who was so intensely involved in life.
Following this last interview, Jackie was to be questioned by the Warren Commission about the assassination in Dallas. The questioning lasted 15 minutes. She didn't say anything, or rather, she said she didn't want to know who assassinated him. They'd taken her husband, her hero, away from her, and nothing could bring him back. The important thing now was to right the myth. These intimate details were supposed to be kept a secret, to be unveiled 50 years after her death. The image of the radiant lady in pink gives way to the painful face of a woman in black, in mourning of herself, who seems to be asking whether, despite appearances, her life has passed her by. Jackie's memories turned sour, like bad wine. She awoke from the intoxication of power, and to better sober up, she spewed forth on everything and everyone. Then she looked in the mirror and fixed her face for the face of history. On June 3, 1964, she told Arthur Schlesinger his task was over. She never wrote her memoirs, nor gave any more interviews about her dead husband or life in the White House. These posthumous confessions are her only testimony. Soon after that, the former First Lady left Washington and her memories behind.